when Sam Cedar popped up in the call, Crowder was like, oh my god, what a nightmare. Big brain Ben Shapiro. Harvard law graduate Ben Shapiro. Now, I don't know about you, but this sounds like a very roundabout way of saying, a dude, she's just asking for it. So yeah, yikes. So I'm sorry, Dr. Peterson. I don't think I need to remind you that there is a growing sentiment to make Indonesia an Islamic state. So if you're worried about a revolution, that is the one that you need to be worried about, not the communists that barely have any political relevance. It gave me migraines. Hello there. Welcome to the Pit of Tensions. We'll be picking up from where we left off with getting exposed to left discourse as an Indonesian. Now, in our last segment, I shared with you the seminar that I attended, hosted by Students for Liberty, a right libertarian think tank, which, long story short, ironically helped solidify my position as a left-leaning person. Now, as the title suggests, this is going to be about the alt-right pipeline, which also helped solidify my position as a left-leaning person. I'm sorry if this segment is going to follow a similar through line as the previous one, but I mean, honestly, rightoids, you gotta fix all your rhetoric here so that you don't just come off as delusional, pearl-clutching, fear-mongering lunatics. For those who don't know, the alt-right pipeline is a host of right-wing content creators, usually ones that are on YouTube, where due to the way that the algorithm is designed, if you watch one video from one content creator, you would then be recommended other videos from other content creators who share similar views, including those that may or may not be more extreme. It may start with something like, say, SJW fail compilation. Yeah, where it would usually involve the classics, Big Red, screaming stuff like, take down the patriarchy, or saying stuff like, you're a bigot, you're a sexist, you're a racist, and drill. The first time that I was exposed to these so-called SJWs was from a PewDiePie video. In fact, the first thing that came to mind, like if you go ahead and search on YouTube, PewDiePie microaggression, I'm pretty sure you will still find that video where it features another one of those classic SJW feminists that is often paddled around in the anti-SJW community to be made fun of. This type of video is generally more agreeable, as they don't really provide any nuance or criticism to what they're saying. It's usually meant to evoke a response, like, haha, look at these women screaming, or, ugh, women, am I right? Always so sensitive, unlike us men. Sorry, I can't say that with a straight face. I've only watched this type of stuff from PewDiePie, and at the time, which was roughly around 4 years ago, I guess, I didn't really put too much thought into it, mostly because I wasn't as politically engaged as I am now, let alone when it comes to issues related to feminism, LGBTQIA+, and racism. Because let's face it, I am 1, a cis man, 2, I am straight, for the most part, and 3, I'm often referred to as white, or to be more specific, bule, in an Indonesian colloquial sense. Now that's privilege if I've ever seen one. Another exposure that I had, which was also because of PewDiePie. I know, I watched a lot of PewDiePie videos back then during my university days. Please don't judge me. The other exposure that I had was Steven Crowder. Now, of course, since we were talking about Steven Crowder, we're talking about one of the Change My Mind segments, since basically that's what made Steven Crowder rose to prominence. I forgot how it was presented by PewDiePie. Could be as a meme, just as a meme, I guess. where then I was either curious about the person behind the meme, or I was then recommended one of the Change My Mind segments. For those who don't know, Change My Mind is a segment where Steven Crowder would set up a table in either in public or in campus. He would then have an evocative line, say, "I am pro-life, change my mind. Male privilege is a myth, change my mind. There are only two genders, change my mind." Where then people would come to him and debate him. The funny thing is that at the time, I was so naive that I thought that what he was doing was intentionally posing as a conservative so that he can push the liberals that he was debating to have better arguments. What is it with me with always assuming the best in people? Anyway, ever since then, I didn't really watch Steven Crowder anymore. Nowadays, it's mostly people debunking his statements, revealing his selective citations and his contradictory statements. So, yeah. I do wish him a speedy recovery, though. I've been seeing that he's at the hospital recently, so Godspeed to you, man. Now, just for the memes, I didn't expect that debating Sam Cedar would have such an effect on him. For those who don't know, he recently tried to debate Ethan Klein from H3H3 Podcasts on the politics surrounding vaccines. Now, the thing is, Ethan Klein is not exactly a political dude like Crowder, so what he did was he invited Sam Cedar from the Majority Report. He's a progressive live streamer who covers the news on a daily basis. The whole thing was a mess. And the funniest thing is that in the midst of all the chaos, Crowder may or may not have revealed that he's been keeping track of Sam Cedar's show to make sure that he is live. Now, thanks to the magic called pre-recording your segment, Sam Cedar managed to snuck under the radar. When Sam Cedar popped up in the call, Crowder was like, "Oh my god, what a nightmare!" It's so funny. Just go ahead and watch it.
Oh geez, okay, so this is what's going to happen. What did I tell you? He was going to do anything he could to avoid. Oh, there he is. Oh no, Sam Cedar. What a fucking nightmare. I had no idea this was going to happen.
This is another disingenuous thing about right-wing demagogues. They would posture as if no leftists are willing to debate them, and yet, given the opportunity, they would immediately back off like the cowards that they are. The only exception to this is probably Charlie Kirk. Yeah, I mean, he's debated Sam Cedar. He's debated Kyle Kalinske from Secular Talk, Hasanabi, and recently he also debated Vosh. I intend to make a review of these debates at one point, but I'll definitely recommend you watching it for yourself so that you can start noticing the distinct approaches that each of these persons have, and also the core arguments given. Now, TLDW, I do think that Charlie Kirk is kind of a good rhetorician. Like, he always has his talking points at the ready, and there are times when he could deliver pretty sound arguments. This can make it pretty difficult to penetrate if you don't know what you're talking about. If I can take one example of his performances, maybe the one against Kyle Kalinske. Yeah. By the way, Kyle Kalinske is the host of Secular Talk, one of the most prominent left-leaning content creators on the platform who happens to adopt the radio show aesthetic, similar to that of Sam Cedar from the Majority Report, both of which also covers the news on a daily basis. The first time that I watched the debate between Kyle and Charlie, I have to admit that I kind of find Kyle's performance to be a bit underwhelming. Now, before you dismiss me, my feelings were the complete opposite the second time that I watched it. The main difference is I just have a better understanding of Charlie's talking points. And by knowing how ludicrous they are, yeah, Kyle's dismissive dunks, they're pretty much justified. especially whenever Charlie Kirk starts rapid firing his arguments like a fucking machine gun, dispensing multiple points in one go. This is what is often called a Gish Gallop, where, honestly, if someone starts firing off like that, then the only appropriate response would be to isolate the weakest point and just hammer it as hard as you can, because In the eyes of the general people, all of these points would come off as if they're in one unison, so dismantling one can be enough to basically delegitimize your opponent's entire arguments. There is a caveat though. The problem is, if someone is not familiar enough with the topic, like me when I first watched the debate, especially if you're talking about a very nuanced subject, then a quippy one-liner without any substantive argument to back that up would come off as, well, underwhelming. Not that this is a broad impression that I got from Kyle, it's just that there were points where I wish that he had expanded a bit more so that he can convince the audience from the other side. This is where rhetoric skill is very important. You can't just have one style and expect that to be one size fits all. Now, while I do find the dunking to be very entertaining, there's a fine line before I find someone leaning way too hard on it, where at that point I would just find that person to be completely disingenuous or being an absolute troll. Anyway, back to cowering with Crowder, who refused to debate with Sam. Wait, hang on. Why do I refer to Steven Crowder by his last name Crowder, but Sam Seder by his first name Sam? Interesting. Anyway, Crowder actually made a point about why he would not debate with Sam, and that's because he finds that to be pointless, since Crowder's audience would only respond by saying, Sam who?
So he can build his...
Do you think your audience cares that I only have 1 million subscribers and you have, what, 6 or 7 million subscribers?
Let me answer. Can I answer your question? Can I answer your question? Can I answer your question? Do you want me to answer your question? My audience would say Sam who? Just like Joe Rogan's audience and Ben Shapiro's and Dave Rubin. Now they all know who you are because you had to shoehorn yourself into another Howard show.
I mean, dude, really? Is that the best you've got? Not only the Crowder has debated people with far less subscribers than Sam. By the way, Sam Seder has 1 million subscribers on YouTube. I don't know how much on Twitch, but I know that it's kind of a small number compared to your average gaming or lifestyle channels. But for politics, that's a pretty huge one. So not only that, Crowder literally built his entire online career off of debating randos on the street or college students. So I'm sorry if I find his excuse to be severely lacking. And if anything, it only shows how much he's worried or how much he's even afraid of debating people who's worth their salt. Speaking of debating college students, this brings us to the next right-wing demagogue, Ben Shapiro. I remembered how Ben Shapiro was kind of hip during the days of anti-SJW content. Heck, PewDiePie even once had him host Meme Review. And come to think of it, it's funny how PewDiePie appears to be the person who keeps exposing me to right-leaning content. I wonder which other right-wing demagogue that he has platformed. Ben Shapiro's entire brand is built around the slogan, "Facts don't care about your feelings." Now, fortunately, I've never really been interested in the guy, mostly because of his voice. It's just way too whiny for me. Much like other right-wing demagogues, Ben Shapiro has been debunked by various people. I think the nail to the coffin for me was Cody Johnston from Summer News. Go check it out if you want to get a general vibe check of Ben Shapiro. Ben's more recent blunder is when he had Neil deGrasse Tyson on his show, when the topic of trans people and their legitimacy popped up. Now, Ben's general stance about trans people is that they're invalid because they contradict science, specifically biology. Neil basically teared into Ben's arguments in an ever so subtle way, if I might add, basically pointing out that hey, there's a difference between sex and gender. Sex is admittedly biological, whereas gender leans more towards social.
Real society. Well, of course, nobody's denying that people identify how they want to identify. So the question is, what is the relationship of that to biology? Meaning, the argument is made that trans women are women, for example. And what that seems to mean is that trans women are identical to women. Now, people want to say trans women are not biological women. Obviously, that is the case. But people don't seem to want to say that, although that is obviously scientifically true. Trans women are not biological women. Biological women are biological women.
But where are you going with this? What are you trying to accomplish by asking yourself, is it science or is it not science? It's people in society.
But this is a perfect example of an area where suddenly it doesn't matter to say things that are just true. Like, why is it bad or wrong?
I have another way to approach this. And so if people express themselves on a gender spectrum, and that is an actual thing in an actual society, if we have not fully explained that scientifically, that's an interesting frontier to study. If you want to say it's only sociological, then it's the purview of the social sciences. I don't care who studies it. It's an interesting fact about society that's worth learning about. To fight someone and say, it's not biological, it's just your this. It's real and it's there. Well, because it's real because it manifests.
Penn fruitlessly tried to defend his points, to which Neil's response was, it can basically be summarized as, why the fuck do you even care?
There's the matrix of what you are biologically, how you express yourself, who you choose as a sexual partner. If we actually live in a free country, as we tell ourselves, people's freedom to behave in any of those ways should not concern you at all. Nor are they requiring that you behave that way.
Neil's arguments work here because during this discussion, Ben tried to present himself as a right libertarian, which I find to be completely ridiculous because Ben is known for his continuous spewing, if you want to call it, of the importance of the nuclear family. Which, by the way, if you don't know, it means that you need a mommy, you need a daddy. And whenever he tries to posture about the free market, I find that to be completely disingenuous because at the same time, he would condemn businesses for not allowing people to come in if they don't wear masks. Of course, it's impossible to talk about Ben Shapiro without mentioning the famous clip from H. Bomber Guy, where basically big brain Ben Shapiro, Harvard law graduate Ben Shapiro, basically argued that it does not matter if climate change leads to people's houses getting drowned because they can always sell the houses.
So let's say, for the sake of argument, that all of the water levels around the world rise by let's say 5 feet over the next 100 years, say 10 feet by the next 100 years, and it puts all the low-lying areas on the coast underwater, right? Which, let's say all of that happens. You think that people aren't going to just sell their homes and move?
Just one small problem. Sell their houses to who, Ben? Fucking Aquaman!
Good stuff. Good stuff indeed. Anyway, if I may be honest, those people, Steven Crowder, Ben Shapiro, at that time they didn't really appeal to me at all. So my exposure to them was more of a one-off type of situation. Sure, nowadays I find a ton of pleasure whenever I see them get dunked on by my favorite content creators, but that's besides the case. The same cannot be said, however, about the next person, Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson is actually the first right-wing person that I was exposed to after I attended the seminar hosted by Students for Liberty. They didn't recommend him to me. At least I don't think so. Honestly, I don't seem to recall why I started watching his videos. It could very well be because of this former intern in my team, who's a good friend of mine now, by the way. I honestly think that he's a pretty interesting person, in a way that, if I could summarize his appeal, he really knows how to make something irrelevant become extremely important. He always takes himself very seriously, he's very charismatic, well-spoken, even though, well, I mean, if we're gonna be honest, the way that he phrases things can be a complete word salad at times. But hey, it works on some people if you want to come off as intelligent. So that considered, it's easy to be pulled by him. For those who don't know, Jordan Peterson is a clinical psychologist who's also a professor at Toronto University. He also has several books under his belt, some of which you might have heard of. They are Maps of Meaning, 12 Rules for Life, and Antidote to Chaos. And his most recent book, Beyond Order, 12 More Rules for Life. He rose to political prominence when he stood against Bill C-16 in Canada, where he claimed that it could lead to people getting jailed for misgendering others. So, as you know, when you refer to people in third person, you would use pronouns. In the English language, it is generally distinguished based on your gender. So, he, him for men, she, her for women. And if you're addressing multiple people, it's they, them. Or so I thought. Unfortunate as it may be to have Jordan Peterson, of all people, to be the first person who exposed me to trans issues, I have to say, even from the get-go, I honestly don't give a fuck about it. Not only that, because in the Indonesian language we don't have that distinction for pronouns, even putting that aside, why the fuck does it matter? If you talk to someone, let's say, and you refer to them as she, her, when in fact they would rather be referred to as something else, what could possibly be the reason for you to not do that other than just to be an asshole? In his defense, during one of his performances, Jordan Peterson did say that he's willing to refer to someone by their preferred pronouns if they ask him to. However, his main problem is that there's a regulation about it, that someone is punishable by law if they were to misgender someone. It's compelled speech, as he would say. In other words, he wants to retain the choice of whether or not he wants to do it. That the government's involvement in the whole thing is some tyrannical oppression, a huge offense to freedom of speech. Is there some truth to his claims then? Can you get jailed for misgendering someone in Canada? The TLDR version of Bill C-16 in relation to pronouns is that 1. Gender identity and expression are added on the list of identifiable groups that are protected from discrimination. 2. This includes hate speech. 3. If there is evidence that an offense is motivated by bias, prejudice, or hate, it can be taken into account by the courts during sentencing. So nowhere in the bill that it mentions about misgendering someone. Brenda Kosman, a law professor from Toronto University, stated that the misuse of gender pronouns, without more, cannot rise to the level of a crime. It cannot rise to the level of advocating genocide, inciting hatred, hate speech, or hate crimes. It simply cannot meet the threshold. Emphasis on the word without more. That means if it's merely accidental, where upon correction there's no indication that you are consistently repeating the same mistake with provable degree of malicious intent, then no, I don't think you would go to jail. Now, to be fair, if misgendering alone, without other pre-qualifying conditions, already constitute as a crime, then yeah, I would take issue with that. I mean, I'm sure that some of you might have experienced a moment where you see a man with long hair and then you mistake them for a woman. This happens because we commonly associate long hair as a feminine trait. Femininity is generally more aligned with a woman's feature. Therefore, we arrive at the conclusion that the person that we see with the long hair is a woman. It's an honest mistake. Of course, if it turns out that person does identify as a woman, regardless of whether they are cis women or trans women, then I guess no harm there. Anyway, I don't want to get too bogged down on this, okay? I will expand more in a separate segment specifically covering gender issues. I'm working on a script that talks about the difference between sex and gender, how sex is a bimodal distribution, what is gender expression, and the societal expectations that come along with it, etc. Speaking of gender expressions, just to get back on Jordan Peterson here, in a notorious interview with J. Caspian Kang from Vice News, Jordan Peterson made some pretty contentious remark. Basically, after some exchanges, the conversation arrived at a point about women wearing makeup in the workplace. This is how it went.
Like, what? Here's a rule. How about no makeup in the workplace?
Why would that be a rule?
Why should you wear makeup in the workplace? Isn't that sexually provocative?
No.
It's not?
No.
Well, what is it then? What's the purpose of makeup?
Some people would like to just put on makeup.
Why?
I don't know why.
Why do you make your lips red? Because they turn red during sexual arousal. That's why. Why do you put rouge on your cheeks? Same reason.
I mean, look.
How about high heels?
What about high heels?
What about them? They're there to exaggerate sexual attractiveness. That's what high heels do. Now, I'm not saying that people shouldn't use sexual displays in the workplace. I'm not saying that. But I am saying that that is what they're doing. And that is what they're doing.
Do you feel like a serious woman who does not want sexual harassment in the workplace, do you feel like if she wears makeup in the workplace that she is somewhat being critical?
Yeah.
Okay.
I do think that.
Now, I don't know about you, but this sounds like a very roundabout way of saying, a dude, she's just asking for it. So yeah, yikes. The reason I fixate on this particular exchange is because this ties back to Jordan Peterson's main appeal, which is his ability to elevate his considerably pernicious thoughts under the guise of his rhetoric, which allows him to fly under the radar. That's one of the words that he really likes to use, by the way, pernicious, along with the word proclivity. One of the pivotal moments is when I encountered the debate between Jordan Peterson and Slavoj Zizek, a Slovenian philosopher. The topic was happiness. capitalism versus Marxism. I find it interesting that instead of pitting capitalism versus socialism, it's Marxism. And also the fact that it's about happiness of all things. In Peterson's opening statements, we hear the same old talking points like socialism has killed millions of people under Stalin and capitalism has lifted millions of people out of poverty. My main criticism of this talking points is that how, while they point out the devastation that came out of these people's regimes under the label of communism, they don't really explain how the foundations of the system, that what the ideology is trying to build, would inevitably lead to such outcomes. There's a dissonance, right? It's not like the bedrock of leftist ideology is to exterminate a certain group of people like you know who. I mean, I understand that not everything has to be set in stone in order for it to lead to adverse outcomes. Systemic racism in the US would be a prime example for this. My explanation so far is that these so-called communist experiments overlooked one of their core values, which is to hold the government accountable. How you need to question their authority whenever they sway from their promises. You should never blindly trust the person in charge. Now, understandably, this is much more difficult if you're up against a society that is used to taking orders, no questions asked. This can start all the way from the family, like when you're not allowed to talk back against your parental figures, for instance, or where you should be complacent if they were to say something like, "Because I told you so," or where you look down upon if you demand for more justification from someone who's deemed to have better credentials. Besides, if you really want to be fair, what happened aren't exactly unique to countries that tried to adopt communism. Even during the days of the French Revolution, when they tried to prop up a democratic society, after they have served the monarchs to the guillotine, did the violence stop? Far from it. Instead, they went through a period where one of the most prominent figures, Maximilien Robespierre, contributed to a society that dissolved into constant paranoia, where the tiniest slip-up would lead to people calling you counter-revolutionary. Their solution to these people? Off with their heads. Look up Reign of Terror and you'll know what I'm talking about. Anyway, to get back to the debate, I'll admit that initially, walking out of that debate, my main takeaway was, oh wow, it's amazing how civil they were, despite having so much disagreements. But upon rewatching it for the second time, it gave me migraines. Even from his opening statement, there's already a misconception on his part that presupposes that the end goal of Marxism is to abolish all hierarchies. Yes, it intends to create a stateless and classless society, but to say that when the abolishment of the two is stated in Marxist literatures, they imply that there wouldn't be any hierarchies anymore, is simply a gross generalization. Even laughing anarchists limit it to the abolishment of unjust hierarchies. So already we're starting off on a wrong foot. Then he went off saying stuff like, if you're a business owner, it wouldn't make sense for you to exploit your labor because you wouldn't be able to extract the maximum amount of labor out of them. Which means that he completely missed the point about surplus value, which is explained in the first few chapters of Das Kapital. This is where the main problem lies. Peterson framed his entire talking points during this debate solely based off of his rereading of the Communist Manifesto. That's it, which, by his own admission, mind you, is merely a call for a revolution. So I'm sorry, Dr. Peterson, that the Communist Manifesto, a 23 pages fucking pamphlet, does not include an elaborate step-by-step explanation on the society that it seeks to build after the revolution. I don't know, man. I just find it really unfortunate that his arguments came off as if fucking Watch Mojo made a video about top 10 reasons why Marxism doesn't work. There was also this moment that slipped my mind when I watched it for the first time, is that when Zizek called out Peterson, "Where are the Marxists?"
Do you think they are really, where did you find this data? I don't know them. I would ask you here, give me some names or whatever. Where are the Marxists here? I don't know any. Who is a Marxist here?
Here's the thing. For someone who popularized the term postmodern neo-Marxists, claiming that they have taken over academia, corporate HR, and all that, I just find it really underwhelming when called out upon. The best that he could do is come up with a name or two instead of having like a list of people handy with him. Hi, editor here. So apparently he didn't exactly mention a name or two. In fact, he only referenced a study conducted by the Heterodox Academy, claiming that 25% of social sciences in the United States identify as Marxists. I guess the lecturers or educators. Now, what you're seeing on screen here is a tweet from Jordan Peterson. So basically, I tried to confirm these claims, so to say, about the 25% statistics, because that's quite a huge number, I have to say. So when I Googled it, for some reason, it led me to Twitter from Heterodox Academy. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So a tweet from Jordan Peterson from back in 2018. Who exactly is this alt-right anyway? The social sciences and humanities are thoroughly dominated by the leftists, even the Marxists, as documented by the Heterodox Academy. Then he added the Heterodox Academy Twitter account, among others. But who are the alt-right exactly? The Republicans? The Trump supporters? Now, underneath here, you will see a response by the Heterodox Academy, stating that, so they said, studies suggest Marxists outnumber conservatives in some social research fields. But this is not because most are Marxist, but because there are so few on the right. Even in the most unbalanced fields, like sociology, Marxists nowhere near a majority. So basically, the source that Peterson cited during the debate disputed his claim in this interaction, I suppose. So yeah, take it as you will. Sure, if you are to be extra charitable with him, you could say that he's simply running out of debate juice at that point. I mean, debating or public speaking is already exhausting as it is, let alone when you're speaking with someone like Slavoj Zizek, who sometimes admittedly talks on a completely different plane of existence. Speaking of postmodern and neo-Marxist, it's almost a rite of passage for left-leaning content creators to make videos criticizing right-wing demagogues. Now, in the case of Jordan Peterson, we've got a lot of people like ContraPoints, Philosophy Tube, Vosh, Hasanabi, Big Joe, and many more. I'd like to focus on ContraPoint's video, who criticized Jordan Peterson for coining the term postmodern neo-Marxist as, in a way, his main political opponent. He would often use the term as a broad, sweeping gesture towards the modern left. And by broad, I do mean very broad. We're not just talking about academia here, but also corporate HR, identity politics activists, liberal politicians, and so on. The problem with this generalization is that Marxists and postmodernists, they don't exactly get along with each other. As ContraPoints put it, Marxists believes in this universal truth that society is built upon class struggle between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, whereas postmodernists, they tend to be skeptical about these grand narratives. Now, in Peterson's defense, he actually acknowledges this criticism during his debate with Zizek. His justification was that this way of thinking emerged after the support for communism started to diminish. This is after Mao's and Stalin's regimes So, as a sleight of hand, as he puts it, Marxists began to relabel themselves as postmodernists and shift the class struggle between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat into oppressor versus the oppressed, linking it to today's liberal identity politics that puts a lot of emphasis on race and gender. Now, I'm no philosopher, but I don't think that really answers the question. If you're to take his argument, we're still retaining the meta-narrative, and other than that, does that mean all postmodernists are Marxists? Then what does postmodern neo-Marxist mean? Why not just say postmodernist then? Why make the new term at all? Also the fact that, say if we're to take the issues of feminism and transgenderism, it's not like they're always in bed with one another. There's a fringe group of feminists, often referred to as trans-exclusionary radical feminists or TERFs, who, to put it lightly, are not so keen on embracing trans women as women. I don't know, I'm lost at this point. All in all, I just find this to be another example of Peterson hyper-intellectualizing something that is virtually non-existent, which, I'm sorry to say, just comes off as fear-mongering. Anyway, I'd like to close this off by saying what I think to be the outcomes of Peterson's ideology and rhetoric. In the same video, ContraPoints made a point that that Peterson's strategy generally revolves around saying something that is more or less uncontroversially true, while at the same time implying something that is controversial. For instance, there is a biological difference between men and women, which is obviously true, but then he would say this in the context of the underrepresentation of women in government, which implies what exactly? Peterson recently posted a clip on his Twitter that featured one of his old public interviews. In the clip, he stated that men, on average, are more interested in things, whereas women are more interested in people. On the face of it, sure, that may be true, but what is he trying to say with that statement? Is he saying it as a matter of factly? Or is he implying that there's something inherent as to why things should stay the way it is? That men should stick to things and women should stick to people? Either way, I'm putting words into his mouth. But at the same time, you can't deny that there are some people who would arrive at the essentialist arguments on what occupations men and women should or should not pursue. So what happens is that statements like that weaponizes those with misogynistic views, including women with internalized misogyny, by the way, those that are currently overwhelmed by the tidal waves of progressivism. So those people, what better way to have their views validated, misguided or otherwise, if not by someone who has a PhD in clinical psychology, who's charismatic, well-spoken, has a few best-selling books under their belt, who also happens to cite quite a lot of biblical stories and imageries. It's almost a godsend. Is this some ingenious approach at his rhetoric? God knows. Or it could simply be that he's being irresponsible with the things he is saying. You be the judge. Fortunately, the debate between Jordan Peterson and Slavoj Zizek is where I stopped in the alt-right pipeline, because after that I was exposed to another socialism versus capitalism debate. Only this time it was between Destiny and Vosh, which I guess started my journey into the leftist pipeline. I say fortunate because given that I kept going, I would have been exposed to some insane shit. Like race realism, the misguided belief that there's some racial superiority by misconstruing biology and IQ statistics, or the great replacement, that the white race is on its way of being erased due to the propagation of interracial sex. Or the worst of them all, genocide denialism, where you begin to question the validity of the heinous things that has been done by the people from Jojo Rabbit. Not that I'm not exposed to them now. I mean, I've seen several debate videos that feature these people, and I have to say, they all come off as completely deranged, no matter how self-composed they try to make themselves out to be. You might say that, hey, the things that you've said just now are completely absurd and should not even be a topic of discussion. But oh boy, over the past few years, you have no idea about the wacky stuff that I've heard. And I hear you. As much as I believe that we should be able to have arguments to defend our beliefs, I would prefer to have a society where you don't have to justify why the extermination of a certain group of people is inherently bad. Same goes with rape and child molestation. Unfortunately, when there are still dipshits strolling around, you need to be ready to first make fun of them, but also know how to rip their twisted worldview into pieces when a situation calls for it. In the case of Indonesia, let's face it, we haven't exactly made a decent foothold for progressive movements. We're all still pretty scattered, with some modest exceptions, I guess. But suffice to say, the Overton window is still very much on the right. Specifically, populist right. What do I mean by this? People who posture as if they represent the interests of the majority, but focusing specifically on their discomfort of the other, which can manifest in many forms. For instance, racial and ethnic difference, which you can see from the animosity between the indigenous Indonesians with Indonesians who happens to have Chinese lineage. Or the most prominent example, the rampant religious fundamentalism. I don't think I need to remind you that there is a growing sentiment to make Indonesia an Islamic state. So if you're worried about a revolution, that is the one that you need to be worried about, not the communists that barely have any political relevance, as much as they try to make you believe that our current president is one. Oh, if only that were true. Anyway, I guess that's it for now. Like initially I wanted to cover left-leaning content creators as well, but I figured it's going to be way too long with this format. Because like I don't want to just cover who they are, their aesthetics, their main focus, and then move on to the next. Like I want to at least provide some specific insights that I got from them. I figured that it's a better way of drawing people to checking out their content. Or in the case of this segment, I guess, deter people from them. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like, subscribe, leave a comment down below, and ring the notification bell icon so that every time I upload a video, it goes right into your feed. Links to my social in the description and in the end card as always, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.